Information Act requests focused. I note that at whatdotheyknow.com volunteer Alex Skeen has made a similar point in a posting dated 18th of July. Please, could I ask you to take note of the advice there? Above all, what do they know should be used only to request information that is actually written down somewhere at the public authority, and not for entering into philosophical debate or asking theoretical questions. All right, we indeed asked for information written down somewhere. Where could it possibly be? Well, now, as if this information should be so difficult to acquire. A question, such a basic question, as relates to the very first fundamental issue of issuing the money or obfuscation of money, whichever the case may, I say, be, of whether the Bank of England or any other central bank in the world gives up lawful consideration in the creation of money equal to the debt it claims to us. After all, what hinges on this fact or non-fact, whichever the case is? If they don't give up lawful consideration, of course they can't be issuing a debt to them, which is our second question. How they claim there's a debt. We covered the bases in the first question, but the second question absolutely seals the deal. How do they claim there's a debt to the bank? Now, are you to tell me, or are we to think, as intelligent, critical thinking people, that this bank, like all other banks in the world, has no written information how it could possibly be giving up lawful consideration equivalent to the debt it claims to itself in the creation of money? There's no information? What information should be more readily at hand? Could we possibly even hold a job for this bank, which is impoverishing the world, in good conscience, without knowing the answer to that question ourselves? Without being able to divulge it without hesitation or even further consideration? Would we not be willingly ourselves participating in a crime or horrendous crime against all people if we knew full well there were no lawful consideration given up in the debts which a purported banking system claims to itself in the creating money? Indeed we would. And I say that's why this question hasn't been answered. But all this pretension to not answer because our questions were too long, we covered the bases of focus and unintelligibility that were raised by this very person himself. We answered to those assertions exhaustively, and that was too many words. Too many words. Therefore, we don't need to answer this question. He goes on, turning to the question in your email, the questions, I should say, in your email, to the extent that we were to take forward your requests, for recorded information in an FOI context, we estimate that to identify any relevant information held by the Bank of England on the topics of money creation, bank debt, promissory obligations, interest, circulation, risk, etc., would exceed the cost threshold in the fees regulations. Ruminate on that a moment. He's citing some regulation that it would cost the bank too much money to answer this question. And now he's offering that as a reason for evasion. Under Section 12(1) of the FOI Act, The bank is not required to comply with an FOI request if it estimates that the cost of complying with that request would exceed the appropriate limit of £450, as stated in the Freedom of Information and Data Protection Appropriate Limit and Fees Regulations of 2004. The figure of £450 equates to 18 hours on the basis that hourly costs under the regulations are taken to be £25 per person per hour. For this purpose, the regulations allow the bank to take into account the costs it reasonably expects to incur in A, determining whether it holds the information. Excuse me. How can you not be a criminal and not know off the top of your head the answer to these questions? Does the Bank of England or does the Bank of England not give up lawful consideration equivalent to the debts it claims to create when it creates money? Yes or no? You don't know that. How can you know that what you're doing is not a crime of the most stupendous magnitude? Because if you don't know that, you don't have any idea how any property could be at risk, which would further justify interest. So you don't know that you've justified laundering the principal into your own unlawful and unrightful and unjustifiable possession. You can't justify that unless you have the answer to that question. Does the Bank of England give up lawful consideration in the creation of money? Yes or no? How many hours does that take per person, per $25 per person per hour? I answered the question right now in less time. How could you exceed 450 pounds of cost to answer that question? Yes or no, God damn it. Yes or no. It's that damn simple. If you know there is lawful consideration, where is it? Explain it to us. How do we get it that we have a debt to you? Can't do that. This is nothing but evasion of the most wicked, wicked, wicked kind. For the purpose, the regulations allow the bank to take into account the costs it reasonably expects to incur. Reasonably expects. How long does it take to say yes or no to the most fundamental question about anything and everything you might possibly do, including avoid answering this question, which you're carefully avoiding answering because you know you're a criminal? This letter is a testimony to the fact this man is aware of the crimes that he's a co-perpetrator of. So he says, accordingly, we are unable to comply with your request. If you're not fuming, you're dead. He ends his letter with a brief paragraph. He says, if you wish to pursue this as an FOI request, then I must ask you, please, to submit a more focused and formulated request. How would that be, Mr. Norman? Bankers make up the rules as they go along because they have to, because they start with the crime. You know, these guys dress like penguins. And there's a reason for their uniforms. He says, I would normally try to give advice on how to narrow your requests so that you could elicit the information you are interested in. As if it doesn't exist and he doesn't know full well it exists. In this case, however, I just do not know where to start with what you have written. Yours sincerely, it says, Ben Norman, Deputy Secretary of the Bank of England. That's ben.norman at bankofengland.co.uk. Telephone number 020-7601-4748. Monday morning, UK time, Mr. Norman is going to receive a telephone call. And it will request a personal meeting with Mr. Norman, which will be recorded. So this brings us up to date on the Bank of England's evasion in our Freedom of Information Act request to answer 4 questions about the nature of money or the obfuscation of money, which is impoverishing the entire world, because under the obfuscation we are required to borrow interest and principal back into circulation as an ever-escalating and eventually, inevitably terminal sum of falsified debt to a mere purported banking system which merely publishes evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, is not even a creditor. You have heard this all your lives. We grant credit. We give up credit. We loan money into circulation. It's a lie. All they do is publish evidence of our promissory obligations to each other. And that is why the world is in the condition it is again. In the second lifespan of the Federal Reserve System, which has acted as the, quote, reserve currency, unquote, of the world. And so, these banks together have impoverished the world twice. They have imposed terminal failure upon us. Now, we've been artificially sustained for some while they pour money into circulation, as needs be, to maintain a minimal circulation capable only of sustaining us to limp along as we are at the brink of terminal failure. But should they fail in reflating the circulation to any greater degree, we only will suffer an immediate precipitation of the failure. So it's a case of, because of the underlying original crime, we're having to suffer further crimes being perpetrated against us, that being an accumulation of further debt. But you know, I have all these people who read the plagiarists, you know, they come at me every day, just in profusion, you know, claiming, oh, this is a, you know, we're suffering all this further debt, you know, that's what's ruining our country. You know, if we do service it, yes, it will ruin our country, for all of our countries. But for the while, what's going on here is evidence of the underlying crime, and that's the thing you need to grab onto here. You know, they're pouring money into circulation because if they don't, the great ever greatening siphon of the banking system is sucking it out at this incredibly rapid rate, and it just will disappear as fast as you can snap your fingers, you know, if they're not pouring money into circulation.